coming to you live. So if you're out there, give me a thumbs up. And if you're able to, if your channel qualifies, you might want to see if you can hit the live chat button and chat back with me. So today's topic is the Fukushima power plant that was crippled in 2011. And I had a couple of observations that I wanted to make. Now, the power plant was hit by a tsunami on March 11 of 2011. 11 is a number, a biblical number, which means chaos, judgment, and reprisals. 10 is the number of government and things being at peace, regulated by a government. But 11 is the number of chaos. And so March 11th, a tsunami struck after a 9.1, I think it was, on the Richter scale earthquake, which is a horrendous earthquake. And it caused a tsunami that flooded the basements of the power plant where the backup generators were. And in any case, the generators got flooded out that run the pumps that circulate the cooling water around the core. And we were all told that in a modern nuclear power plant, when they scram the reactor, that when there's no water around the core, it stops the reaction because the water is actually needed for the reaction. But that didn't prove to be the case, because as the reactors were scrammed, they still had heat that built up, and some of the cores melted, and it blew the tops off the buildings, and they had to cool the cores down with seawater, and they had to run and take batteries out of automobiles and try and run the pumps on these batteries, because the batteries that the Japanese army sent were not the right type. So it was a whole fiasco, and it was very surprising that the Japanese hadn't planned ahead. They had a seawall, but the tsunami overcame the seawall very quickly and caused a disaster. And then, of course, it was so contaminated, also with the risk of more explosions, that the men really couldn't go in and turn the valves that they needed to control things manually. So the whole thing was a mess. And here we are years later, and it's going to take decades to continue to clean up the mess and to decommission this plant. But some of the things that I wanted to mention was if the surrounding area of 311 miles of land around Fukushima is going to be contaminated for the next 20,000 years or so, why wouldn't they just take that contaminated water and spray it on the ground around the power plant instead of dumping it into the ocean? And the second point is that according to the UN, the amount of contamination in the water is negligible as far as being under the required safety amount. But they haven't taken into consideration the cumulative effect that it will have on fish and wildlife that are subjected to that water. You know, like fish that swim around where there's mercury, and the mercury builds up in the meat of the fish. The same thing is possible with this radioactive water. And then another thing, because see, we old people, we do our homework. The Japanese used a system called ALPS to try and decontaminate the water. They ran it through this system that removed the cesium 137 and the strontium 90 from the water. But there's an isotope called tritium, which is a hydrogen isotope that they can't remove from the water for whatever reason. And tritium is an isotope of hydrogen. So there it would make sense that hot water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. Tritium is an isotope of hydrogen. So you just dump the stuff into the ocean, no hurt, no foul. And tritium has a relatively short half-life of 12 and a half years. So that sounds all great and wonderful, except for the fact, like I said, the cumulative effect and the fact that tritium emits beta particles. There's alpha, there's beta, and there's gamma. Man with no name, what's up, man? So there's alpha, beta, and gamma particles to radiation, and some are more deadly than others. But the problem with tritium is tritium emits beta particles. And where and when are beta particles the most dangerous? You guessed it, when you breathe it in or drink it. And that's exactly what they're doing in dumping this tritium into the ocean. So, like I said, they didn't really think this thing through. And again, I question why they don't just take the water and sprinkle it onto the already contaminated soil around the Fukushima power plant and let the water evaporate or whatever, and let nature take care of it like it has in Chernobyl and Pripyat. And they found now that only 30 or so years later, after the Chernobyl incident in 1986, that there are people moving back into the exclusion zone. Most of them are old people, and they haven't found too much damage to wildlife, where the wildlife has actually adapted. They have the wolves have come back. There's a certain breed of horses that is thriving in Chernobyl. birds and other wildlife, moose, and old people are thriving. Children, I don't think they let back into the exclusion zone because the cells of a child are growing and all of that other stuff. They're more subjective to cancer than older people whose cells have already done what they need to do and are just in the maintenance phase. So I found that very interesting that that people are saying, well, you can survive radiation a whole lot better than we thought, but that's not necessarily a reason to just go ahead and poison everything on purpose. So that's more or less my thinking about the whole deal with Fukushima. All right, well, if y'all don't have anything to add, I'm going to go ahead and sign out and take myself a little poppity pop nappy nap. I love y'all. See y'all later.